Wow, thanks, Shep, for your kind words. Yeah, no, thank you, Shep. Um, yeah, last year that was fun talking about scrolling animations. The only problem is indeed, well, the syntax is under discussion. So it could be that everything I told last year won't work during the course of this year. But the topic of today, that one will last for ages. It has been around for ages. And truth be told, before I made this presentation on the Cascade, I thought like, yeah, I know the Cascade. But then once you start digging into the Cascade, it's like, I only know half of it. So now I hopefully know all of it. And I want to share it with you. So let's share my screen. A window, this window. Share. Yeah, that should be it. You should see my slides, Understanding the Cascade. My name is Bramus, and today we are here at CSS Café. I've already had the introduction here. Yes, I am on Twitter, so thank you for the introduction, Shep and Niels. I am on Twitter at Bramus. I also run a blog, bram.us. It turned 20 in November, quite a birthday. It wasn't always a tech blog. It was more like a personal blog that evolved into a tech blog over time. And you can subscribe to it using RSS, or you can also follow it on Twitter if you want. So I tweet using these two main accounts that I use. And today I want to talk about the Cascade, namely, if we see this piece of code here, we have a little input type is password, ID password, and then we have some CSS. How does the browser know which color to apply? Will it be the blue? Will it be the gray? Will it be the line? Will it be the hot pink? Or will it be the default black that the browser provides us? How does it know which color to choose? Well, today's topic, enter the Cascade. I could have added an animation in there, yeah, like the big end, the Cascade. What is the Cascade? Well, there's a definition, of course. You can read it in the spec. I'm using the definition from CSS Cascade level 5. So that was the version that was published late last year, just before the end of the year, it got published. CSS Cascade 5, and the works on CSS Cascade 6 have already started. But so we're going to use the CSS Cascade 5 definition. What is the Cascade? Well, officially it says the Cascade takes an unordered list of declared values, blah, 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 stores them, and then outputs a single cascaded value. A lot of fancy words, a lot of expensive words. I kind of reformatted it for you. What is the Cascade? Well, to me, the Cascade is the algorithm that CSS uses to resolve competing declarations that want to be applied to the element and then choose the winner. So winging back to our example, the Cascade is the algorithm that will say, well, the color I'm going to choose to apply to this input will be this one and not those other ones because reasons I'm about to explain you. The Cascade, it's an algorithm. It has several steps or several criterions, and I've listed them here. Let me just change the layout a bit because, well, it's named the Cascade. How do we get to that name? Well, if you change the layout a bit, instead of putting them on one line, you can also sort them like this. Then you have more like a real cascade. If you don't know the term cascade, well, the cascade, it also applies to a waterfall. Like in French, it's les cascades. For example, in English, it's cascade. But if it's a word uncommon to you, the clue here is that the water, before it, when it goes from the top of the river to the bottom, it can take several steps. For example, if it starts here in the middle, it has to do 1 step, 2 step, 3 step, 4 step, and then it hits the water. But if it goes here on the right, it only has to take 1 step, and then it falls to the bottom. And that's the same with our CSS cascade. We have these 5 steps, 6 steps here, and the cascade will go over each and every of those steps or each and every of those criterions one by one until it finds a winner. So hey, is this context, element attached, can I define the winner there, layers? Does this give me a winner? No, a specificity. Oh, okay, here we have our winner, and then the cascade will not check the succeeding steps from it. So the cascade, an algorithm, several steps, it checks them one after the other until one of those steps says, here is your winner, and then it ignores all the other steps. And it does this. It does that for each and every declaration that is competing with each other. So if you have like two in the same declarations, those are like, for example, the color one that we saw, those are competing declarations. So here again, here are our 6 steps, and today, well, we're going to dig into them. The first one is origin and importance. The definition says, well, the origin of a declaration is based on where it comes from and its importance. In our browsers, we have several origins that can define, that can hold CSS declarations. These are ranked from low to high. And then here in this representation, the topmost one will win. So if you have a color somewhere defined in one of those top origins, that one will win from one of the lower origins. By default, well, the 3 well-known origins, or the 3 default origins, are the normal user agent declarations, the normal user declarations, and the normal author declarations. The normal user declarations, what are those? Well, those are the styles that the browser brings with it itself. So that's like the default black text on a white background, links are blue, text is Times New Roman, and stuff like that. Well, that is contained inside the browser in the user agent style sheet. You also have user declarations. That's an origin that stacks on top, and that contains declarations set by the visitor. So the visitor, that's actually the user that comes visit your website. For example, somebody who has a visual impairment can say, like, you know, that default 16 pixels Times New Roman, I want to have it to be 32 pixels. Well, they can define in their user style sheet, they can say, hey, you know what, on the body, the font size is 32 pixels. And that will override the default styles that the browser ships with itself. And then the third origin I want to talk to you right now is the normal author declarations, and those contain the styles that you as a developer set. So in the specification, they always talk about authors, and what they mean with authors is, well, us developers. It's simple like that. And I can show you this. I can show you this in the browser. For example, here I have a simple HTML5 page. Well, HTML5, it doesn't exist anymore. So a simple HTML page with several elements on there. And in the middle here, you can see I have the link selected. And then on the right, I can see what the browser applies style-wise, thanks to DevTools for showing me. So this thing here on the right, let's make it a little bit bigger. It tells us a lot because what we can clearly see here, I'm about to highlight it now, those are the user agent style sheet contents. So I have the link selected, and then you can see, well, in the user agent style sheet here in Chromium, it says the color is a WebKit link. That's like a variable that says it will be blue. The cursor will be a pointer, so that's the little hand if you go over it. And then text declaration underline, that's a little line underneath. And the same goes for the H2. The H2, it says by default a font size of 1.5 EMs and the font weight of bold. And what we also see here using the DevTools is this little snippet here in the middle. That's the font size of 1.65 EMs. And then the name here, well, it's a style sheet that I placed inside of the HTML, so it doesn't say styles.css, it just gives you like a hash. But this here is my style. So the style that I defined as an author. So if we remember from just a minute ago, the user agent style declarations, they go underneath our author declarations. So in this case, the 1.65 EM will win from the 1.5 EM because we have the lowest priority at the bottom and the highest priority at the top. So our winner will be 1.65 EMs. And yeah, that's pretty cool at this point. Our user agent styles, those are shipped by the browser, and the user can set certain preferences that they want, so that's the visitor, and then we as authors, we can write our own CSS that will be applied on top of that. But there's more. You can see I only have these 3 here filled in, and we have like 8 blocks to be filled in. Well, enter. That slide shouldn't be here. Well, again, it gives you the overview. We have 8 blocks to be completed. What happens when we use important? There is a cool thing when it comes to several origins and later on layers. I will tell you as well. If you use important, they create their own origins, and they get sorted in reverse. So if you look at their normal user agent declarations, you have normal user agent, normal user, and then author on top. But then if you take the important declarations, these are also sorted, but they stack in reverse on top. So you have the important user agent declarations at the very top. These override the important user declarations, and these override the important author declarations. There's a logic behind this because they are mirrored that you can see, but also it makes sense. If the user, so the visitor, says, you know what, the body font size, I really want it to be 32 pixels, they can add exclamation important to it. And that indeed will override styles that we as developers have specified. So the user, they have control over us using their important user declarations. So they stack in reverse: user agent, user author, the normal ones, and then the important ones, they stack in reverse, and then they meet each other towards the middle. The 2 extra slots that we have there, what are those? Well, there go the animation declarations and the transition declarations. For example, here with animations, if you have an element that is moving from position and the color is changing during that animation, well, of course, you want that animation to take the upper hand above all the regular declarations that are there. So these here, these are our origins. What do you need to remember from all this? User agent, user author, and then the important ones, they stack on reverse on top. So this, the cascade here, if it sees this snippet, our browser, if it sees this snippet here, what will the color be of the input? Well, we have here the important one. So all these styles here, these are part of the author declarations, but this one here, this one has the importance, so that one becomes part of the important author declarations. So this one will take the upper hand and that one will win. So our color will actually be hot pink for our input. Those are the origins. Yeah, let's move on. Context, I'm not going to go into detail on this one because it has to do with web components, shadow DOM, stuff like that. It's not something that you encounter a lot, except for, of course, if you are working with them, but I don't think that many people work with them. The rule there is, well, normal rules from outer context wins from inner rules. That's just the only thing that you have to remember from that. That's criterion 2. Now let's move on to the third one, element attached styles. This is new in Cascade 5. Before it wasn't like defined separately, but for Cascade level 5, it was separated from the whole specificity part. That's because layers, that's the next one, it had to fit in between both of those. So element attached styles, that's a new term in Cascade 5. What does it say? Well, declarations that are attached directly to an element. So for example, if you have a style attribute attached in your markup with some declarations in there, these will take precedence over declarations of the same importance that are mapped via style rule. So those are like your normal author declarations. So if we see this snippet right here, I have all these with several with separate specificities right here in our style sheet. Well, the inline style, that's the one that will win. So our input here will have the color blue actually be applied, because that was the third criterion from the cascade, and that one decided who the winner is. And then layers. Layers is a new thing. And I guess it's also the reason why many people are here to get started with layers. Yeah, let's dive in. What do layers do in CSS? Oh yeah, I put a little crown on there because I think they're a very, very great addition. They were championed by Miriam Suzanne, whom you might know from container queries. So the person who was like the thriving force behind container queries, who cracked that nut, that's Miriam Suzanne. She also worked here on layers. You should follow her on Twitter. @terriblemia is the Twitter handle. I'm sure somebody will drop it in the chat right now. Definitely give her a follow. So what do layers allow you to do? Well, it's a representation here. With Cascade layers, you are able to layer up your CSS. So you have one layer of CSS, and then you have another layer, and so forth. And then stuff that isn't put in an explicit layer, that will become part of the unlayered style. So that's like everything that's not in a layer that will be grouped in your unlayered styles. And then the Cascade says, well, when comparing declarations that belong to different layers, declarations whose Cascade layer is last wins. So if I bring back to this one here, if we layer up our CSS in several layers, I will show you the syntax in a few slides further down. Then it says, well, the declaration, the layer whose declaration came last, that one will take the upper hand from the one before it. So the sorting order here is lowest priority is listed first, and then highest priority is listed at the bottom. FYI, you can also nest layers. That's also really nice. So you can say like, hey, these are all the styles regarding typography. But then inside of the typography layer, you can say, well, this layer here, that's for the headings, and this one is for the regular text and stuff like that. So you can like group them. How do you define a layer? Well, that's the @layer keyword. I've done a full post on that. You can read it on my blog. The link is right here. But I'm going to show you the basics right now, well, even more in the basics right now. So how do you create a layer using the @layer add rule? And it looks like this. For example, here I have these two styles, A and .link. Well, I have grouped these in one base layer. And furthermore, I have a typography layer. Then I have a utilities layer. So I have 3 layers at this very moment. And then here again, I have a fourth @layer block that reuses the name typography. Now, the cool part is when the parser sees this, it will append the contents of this block to what was already defined. So you can define several layers, and then later on, you can append more styles to those layers. To give you like a visual example, say I have this style sheet with several @layer blocks. So I have a theme there, reset, base, again, theme, base, theme, utility, theme, and some unlayered styles. So these can perfectly be somewhere in between there. And then I have another layer called whatever. How does Cascade layers sort these? Well, the parser, it starts just at the very top of your style sheet, and then it goes down. And from the moment it encounters a layer that it wasn't defined before, it will say, okay, this is a layer, I'm going to create it, and it will be in the order that it sees them. So again, this is in the spec. Cascade layers are sorted by the order in which they are first declared. And then you have the same inside layers for the nested layers. That's also the same mechanism there. So the parser starts just from top to bottom, and it says, oh, layer here, layer here, layer here. This is the order. So with our example here, what is the layer order? Well, it sees layer theme. It says, okay, I'm going to put it there. Then it sees the layer reset. So that's our second layer. Then layer base is our third layer. And then the cool part here, again, it sees theme. It won't create a fourth layer, but it will append the contents of the theme here on the left. It will like put them together with the previous contents. And then base again, theme, utility. Oh, it's a new layer because the name, it hadn't seen it before. Again, theme, unlayered styles, important one. The spec always says unlayered styles always go last. So if this block right here, if the gray block would have been at the top, it would still end up here at the very bottom when Cascade layers has sorted each and every layer. And then @layer whatever, again, it's a new definition of a layer, so it will fit there right in between before the unlayered styles. So that's what Cascade layers do. They allow you to group your CSS, chunk it up, but you can also define like the order, and then it gets, yeah, the layers that come last, those win from layers that are defined earlier on. Now you might look at this and say, like, why would you want to have team before reset and then base? Shouldn't the order be something different? Yes, it should be something different. And that's the cool part about the spec. It also gives us a layer statement. So this is my tip. Predefine your layer order upfront using the layer statement. So if I add this rule here at the top of my CSS, then I will say to the engine, to Cascade layers, like, hey, you know what? I want this to be the order. I first want my reset layer, then I want the base layer, then I want the team layer, and then I want the utility layer. And then again, it will like go over all of those layers that you have defined, but since they have already been declared, it will append the contents in order. So reset will be the first one, base will be the second block, theme will be the third one, and then utility fourth, and then layer whatever, that will be the fifth one, because I hadn't defined the order of it up front. So it will be appended to the very end of the list. And then again, our unlayered styles, these go at the bottom. I think this is pretty cool. And it's also a tip that I want to give you, like, always define, if you are using layers, always define your layer order up front. It will save you a lot of headaches, because one of the reasons that we have layers was like, if you've done the IT CSS game and then you have some third-party CSS, you have to like be very cautious when do you load your third-party CSS, and because those rules can override your own rules. With Cascade layers, you get actual control over that. So this is an example. Again, I have my input here. I have my several layers, base typography, forms, and overrides. Then I have the contents of my layers. They are a bit mixed together, so they aren't in order here because I've set up the order up front. Which one will win? Well, the ones from the later layers will win from the ones from the earlier layers. So here in overrides, I have a color of lime set. Overrides is the last layer, so that one will win. Do note if I add some unlayered styles here in between. So if I add this one right here, input color backup purple, that one will win, because this whole declaration is part of the unlayered styles, and unlayered styles always come last after all of your layers. Very important thing to note. If you're wondering about browser support at this very moment, like, whoa, okay, layers, all cool, nice. Which browsers do support it? Well, it's in Chromium behind the flag since version 96. So Chromium-based browser, those are Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, Brave, Polypane. Those are all based on Chrome, on the Chromium rendering engine, which is Blink. So it's in version 96 behind the flag, and then it's also enabled by default in version 99. So version 99, that will be released. I think it's a week from now that it will be released. In Firefox, it's been there since version 94, also behind the feature flag. It will ship with version 97. I think 97 is due around this time as well. And then in Safari, they also have support for it in technology preview version 133. No estimate in which main Safari version will be released. I'm guessing Safari 16, but yeah, we won't know until it's released. Another thing you might be wondering about layers, say you work with external CSS files, like, can you load these into a layer? Yes, that's also possible. So you have this layer function that you can append after an import. So you say, like, import my reset.css file, an external file, and import it into the layer of reset. So again, here at the top, we have defined our order of our layers. And then we import our external CSS files into the proper layers. So I can like move the order of these import statements. The layer order again will always be defined by this very first rule. And then later on, I can have another add layer block to append some more styles to certain layers. One thing worth noting though is once you've done this import and then add layer, you can't do another import later on. It's a limitation. It's documented in the spec. So you can't do add layer, add import, add layer, add import, add layer. That won't work. So again, my tip is define the layer order up front with add layer statement, then do all your imports, and then append all other CSS that you want using add layer blocks, and they will be appended to the already established layer order. Crazy, right? If you don't want to use add import, this is also something really, really new. You can use a layer attribute in your markup. So if you link to an external CSS file, you can say like, hey, okay, it should go into this layer. Now, you shouldn't use that. The problem is that browsers today, they don't understand this layer attribute, so they will just ignore it. And the end result will be that they just load up your reset.css file like they would today without putting it into a certain layer. There's a solution for that, the solution that we will be able to use in the future, and that's an extension to the media attribute. It was just decided a week ago that the grammar would be extended to support everything add import allows. So we can use an add supports media query there that defines when and if and where it should be loaded. So here we say, okay, the reset.css file loaded into the reset layer, but then the media attribute says only load this style sheet when the add layer add rule is supported. So the add rule function that you see here, that's also a new addition to CSS. It was also approved just last week. It's not in any browser at this very moment. The spec work still has to be done. But this allows you to do a feature detection for a certain add rule support. So you can also do add supports, add rule, add font face, for example, to feature detect, hey, is add font face supported, yes or no? And so here we conditionally only load our reset.css style sheet when add layer is supported, and we will load it into the reset layer. I've got a blog post on the add rule function as well for you to read. That was a lot about layers, right? Well, we're not done yet with layers. I'm sorry. There's this one thing. If you use important inside of a layer, you see the same thing happen as with origins. Remember, with origins, we had user agent, user, and an author. And then if you use important, they get stacked in reverse on top of that. Well, the same thing happens with layers. There's this text here, but it only confuses me. It says, oh, declarations whose cascade layer is last wins for normal rules. And then for important rules, the declarations whose cascade layer is first wins. So like with first, last, what does it work? Well, visually, it works better for me. If this was our order, we have our reset layer, then our base layer, our theme layer, and our unlayered styles. So again, later declared layers, they went from earlier declared layers. Once you use the important, you need to like invert the order and then put them on top of there. So if we add important, we get important unlayer styles, important theme layer, important base layer, and important reset layer, ranked from lowest priority at the top to highest priority at the bottom. So yes, unlayered styles will override everything you have set up in your layers. But also, yes, you can use important in one of your layers to override your unlayered styles. Yeah, pretty crazy. And that was layers. If you don't understand it right now, then I'm sorry for the bad explanation. But also don't worry, it took me quite some time like to fully grasp it. And also to know like when to use it. So if you work with IT CSS, the inverted triangle of CSS, where you layer up your styles, they will come in handy there, because you can really enforce the layer ordering. Or if you've worked with third-party CSS, where you have found like, hey, my third-party CSS is overwriting my own CSS, well, then you can also use layers. Because you can say, well, all of the third-party CSS, I'm going to chuck it into one layer, then I'm going to write my own CSS into my own separate layer, which will have, which will override those from the third-party CSS layer. So that's pretty cool. Let me get a sip right here. And then specificity, that's the next criterion. So if layers have defined a winner, then the cascade will stop right there. If it hasn't at the very moment, so if your declarations, your competing declarations are from the same origin, or from the same context, are not set using the style attribute, and are part of the same layer, then the cascade will check the next criterion, which is specificity, a concept I hope that many of you already know. But yeah, there's some caveats with it. Let me focus the right screen. Okay, so what does the spec say? Well, the spec is pretty clear about it. The declaration with the high specificity wins, period. How do you calculate specificity? That's the trick question. You have certain rules right here. So that is the link to the spec. No worries, I will post the slides online. This is being recorded, so the information will get to you afterwards. So this is the link to the spec about how to calculate specificity. Specificity, how is it represented? Well, it's represented as a triad or a triple or trio, how do you like to call it? And it has three values, A, B, and C. And by default, specificity starts at a value of 0. Before the specificity is determined, everything has a specificity of 0, and then it will determine the specificity. How do you determine the specificity? Difficult word to pronounce, by the way. How do you determine specificity? You look at what selectors are used, and based on that, you can you can define the value. Let me just give it a bit of color right there, and we're going to run through some examples. So the star, the universal selector, well, the spec says star, no specificity, so our number remains the same, 0, 0, 0. If we have an element selector, then it says, well, in the C part of your trio of the triad, in the C part, you add 1 for each and every element selector that you encounter. If you have a class selector there, well, it's 0, 1, 0. So that's in the B part. The same for pseudo classes. That's also 1 in the B part. And then IDs, they go in the very first part. So that's 1, 0, 0. And then you can start combining these. For example, if you have a sidebar space dot title, well, that's 1, 1, 0 because you have one ID selector, one class selector, no element selectors. So 1, 1, 0. It doesn't matter which combinator that you use, by the way. So if you use like the direct child combinator, the specificity is the same. It just looks at the selectors themselves, not the combinators that you use. So the specificity of this one and that one, those are the same. Cool, right? How about this one? Well, we have one ID selector, the sidebar, and then we have 3 element selectors. So we get 1, 0, 3. Here we have sidebar ul.secondary, li, and then the direct child, the A. And you just count them. 1 ID selector, 1 class selector, 3 element selectors, and then again we have our specificity number. But then comes the part you have to compare them, right? How do you know which one has a higher specificity than the other? Well, here the one on the left will win. So the one with 1, 0, 0, that one has a higher specificity than 0, 5, 3. Why is that? Well, the spec says when comparing specificities, compare each and every part of the triple one after the other. So first you compare the A part. If that one determines the winner, then you say, okay, well, that one's heavier. If not, if they both have the same number, then you compare the B part. If the B part has the same number, only then you compare the C part. And if those are equal to, well, then they have the same specificity. So a little formula, if you want to like manually sort specificities using JavaScript, you can use this. First compare the A part, then compare the B part, then compare the C part, and else they are equal. That one is really important. You have to compare each part individually. So if you have like 10 classes, some people say, well, specificity is just a number. You just add the numbers. So this is 100. And then here on the left, you would have 103. That's not correct. You have 1, 0, 0, and you have 0, 10, 3. So the numbers, they can't bleed from the units to the tens to the hundreds. They can't do that. You always have to specify specificity as the triad. So which one wins here? Well, even though the one on the right has 10 class selectors and 3 element selectors, doesn't matter. The one ID selector from the left, that one takes the upper hand. So the one on the left, that one has a higher specificity than the one on the right that we see right here. If you're wondering how to calculate this, well, Kilian, he's also in the live stream. I've seen Kilian Valkov, the author of Polypane. He has this wonderful tool, the CSS Specificity Calculator. It's really helpful, and you might also recognize the colors, the color codes that I use. So I took the color codes from the website. So if you have a selector and you're not sure, like, what is the specificity, you can drop it into this tool. So that's polypane.app/CSS Specificity Calculator. A really, really great tool. I see that the chat is growing. So yeah, if somebody would, voila. Kilian, drop the link in there and people can check it out. So if we have these CSS rules, they are part of the same origin, they are part of the same context, no element attached styles, they are part of the same layer. Which one will win? Well, we have the ID selector there with the hash password, color line. That one will win because it has the highest specificity. The one there below, input and then type password in between the square brackets, that one has a specificity of 011. And then the one above that, input, that one has a specificity of 001. So the ID selector here wins. Specificity, cool, right? Yes, awesome, but I didn't tell you everything. I didn't talk about is, not, and has. I'm going to focus on is. So is a selector that gets expanded. So it says like, hey, from the UL, one of the direct children, that's an ally. If it's either the one with the ID highlighted or the one with the class active, that one I want to target. So it basically gets rewritten to UL direct child LE ID highlighted, comma, UL direct child LE dot active. So it gets rewritten like that. What is the kicker here? Well, when you are using is or not or has, so it applies to all those, it will take over the specificity from its highest specific argument. So you might think, well, ULLI.active, that one has a specificity of 012. Well, here it's actually overwritten by the A part being 1, because here we have an ID selector. So the whole thing that you see in between the is, that one will take over the specificity from its most specific argument, here being the ID selector. So we end up with 1 for the A part, no clauses, no pseudo clauses selected, and then 2 elements covered. So that's a really important thing. What is cool, by the way, is that you can like abuse this. After the .active, you could put comma, and then you can put 5 IDs, like all squished together. And then you would have a specificity of 502. So you can totally abuse it. You can like crank up the specificity, even though it doesn't target any element. Neat hack in some cases when you need it. Another thing I didn't tell you is where. Where, that's also, it works like the same as is, so it allows you to target the same elements. So again, you can say, well, if it's the one with the ID highlighted or the one with the class active, but the specificity will evaluate to 0. So here with both selectors, so with the one with the is and the one with the where, we target the very same elements, but the specificity is entirely different. Perhaps I should put like a comparison slide here. I'm going to add that for next time I give this presentation. So where, specificity of 0, and then is, not, and has the specificity of its most specific argument. Some people notice I've noticed that you already knew this, but one that you probably didn't know, or at least I didn't know before I was like digging into the spec, is about end child and end last child. This is a really special case. So it allows you to like select every odd child or every third child, or the like the first one. That's also possible. How does the specificity of that one get calculated? Well, it has the specificity of the pseudo class itself. So that's end child. So in the B part, we add 1, but then it also takes the specificity of the highest specificity of one of its arguments. Yes, this is a valid selector. So that's 2n plus 1 of div comma dot highlight. It's only supported in Safari. This one allows you to do like, give me the second element with the class, end of class selector. I also have blog posts on that. It's not linked here, but this is really cool. I really hope that other browsers will also support this one. It allows you to do cool stuff. But do know, specificity gets calculated in this like weird way. And Kilian's tool, so the specificity calculator by Kilian, it also supports this. So it plays nice with this. Yeah, cool stuff. And that was specificity. The last criterion of the cascade, and it's the most easy one, I swear. Order of appearance, what does it say? Well, the last declaration in document order wins. Most of you will know this one. So if you have several ones here, well, it says all selectors have the same specificity, same layer, same origin. The last one simply wins. So if you look at it from top to bottom, which is the last one? Well, the color line, that's the last one. So that one will win. And that was the cascade, the 6 steps of the cascade highlighted. It was a lot of information, I know. A lot of it most likely will have been new to many of you. I know some of it was when I looked things up. So if you're like mentally full right now, no worries. But if you do happen to have a question, right now is the time for questions.